we've been saying this, it's about control, as you know,
Yeah.
for a very long time. And we've had a practice lockdown. We're having 15-minute cities. I'm just wondering how much longer people can tell me that I'm a conspiracy theorist. That what actually has to happen for them to believe that it's not a conspiracy, it's actually happening.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, you know, I think a lot of the problem is that yes, the establishment has divorced itself from its electorate completely, and it's an autonomous organization which basically is funded by people for whom it feels it has no real responsibility. I think that is the essence of where we are with virtually every state in the world. I mean, on you know, both in Asia and also in the West. I mean, particularly in the West. The problem is that we all basically know this, and we all sort of come up with theories which are not necessarily the right theories. So, you know, the conspirators, as it were, the conspirators are the state, not us. But in trying to double guess it, we come up with conspiracy theories which aren't necessarily relevant to the conspiracy that's actually being put together by the state. And it's quite a difficult thing to sort of try and work out where the truth actually lies. But there is absolutely no doubt that the state regards itself as having, well, any responsibility it has to its electorate is inconvenient at most. Generally, the way to deal with it is to ignore it. And that's what they do. And they go on their own sort of power trip, if you like. You know, and I mean, the whole sort of concept of, you know, what's wrong in the world is actually something that's dreamt up by the establishment, you know, when it comes to things like, you know, fossil fuels, things like, you know, pandemics, and in my sphere of influence, particularly my sphere of activity, economics. You know, I mean, the whole thing is just completely distorted, and the truth has got lost, and it's just got totally buried in everybody's, you know, in the establishment's vested interests.
It was interesting, Lagarde saying that, of course, using terrorism, of course, this is all for our own benefit, of course. Terrorism, so that's why she has to come down from big deals that drug dealers might do, you know, the €1,000. She has to bring that right down to, she was talking about 300 or 400 euros, because you could fund terrorism on that, you know, bits and bits of that sort of small thing. So what actually means, of course, really between the lines, or not being too difficult to read between the lines, that means that it's nobody it doesn't affect. It doesn't affect it. Everybody is going to be sucked in if it's 300 euros. Every housewife in the shops, you know, everybody. I mean, any holiday that they don't want you to have because it comes up on your screen. You have already had a holiday this year, and you flew. You've had your ration of air miles. The 15-minute cities, all these kind of things are coming on it. It's not just, of course, the European Union. Of course, it's North America. And did you see the piece that I sent as well that is happening to Russia? Russia are going down this. Russians are going down this route. They're setting up their new cryptocurrency. It might be more reliable. It might be better backed or something. We don't know quite yet. But whether that's asset backed, but that's also going down exactly the same path, which came to me as a bit of surprise.
Yeah,
this is a totally global phenomenon, and of course, if it's happening in Russia, it's going to be happening. That's going to be a BRICS phenomenon as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I read the piece which you forwarded to me specifically to comment, I think, on this aspect, and I think going back to my point about you know, the people trying to work their way around conspiracy theories, I think this is a little bit of a conspiracy theory about a conspiracy theory. What I do know is that on the 27th of December, Sberbank announced a new digital gold token, as it were. It was a new fund backed by gold, and there'd be tokens issued in it. Now, it's a little bit of a stretch to say that this is actually going to be a currency. You could say that in conjunction with what Sergei Glaziev wrote on the Vodomosty paper on the same date, you put this together with, there's no doubt that Russia is moving towards some sort of gold standard, and by implication, what Sergei Glaziev was actually working on, which is the new trade currency for the Eurasian Economic Union, that also looks like it'll be based on gold. I mean, it's the simplest thing. It's legal money anyway, so, what's not to like about it? But I think to assume that Sberbank's fund is a prototype CBDC is probably going a little bit too far. I think the other thing is that as far as the Russians are concerned, they've had not the happiest of experience with the Russian central bank. That stopped buying gold, which turned out to be completely the wrong thing, because when they stopped buying gold, what they were doing was they were adding to their currency reserves. That's proved to be a completely worthless exercise. So that was very much a black mark against the Russian central bank. I mean, other comments in there, that Putin is, or his associates are promoting the World Economic Forum and all the rest of it. I think that's possible, but I think the motive is to destabilize the West. I mean, they're not fools, these Russians. They know what they're doing, and they know that they can see the weakness in the World Economic Forum's policies. They know exactly what Schwab is trying to achieve. They see the flaws in his approach. They see the people who seem to be attracted to it amongst the Western leaders, who the Russian leadership would not rate. They wouldn't give them the time of day. I mean, like sort of the leadership of Canada and places like that. So I can see that they might sort of encourage the World Economic Forum to continue to destabilize the West. Because remember, I mean, the Russians know, the value of making your opponent woke. They know this. I mean, they've been in this sort of psyops business for decades. I mean, going back, the KGB, various people have reported on this, and, senior KGB men who have defected to the West have described how, the Russian intelligence services try and destabilize the morality of the West. Weaken the West, and it makes it so much easier for them to deal with the West. I mean, so it doesn't surprise me at all that that the Russians would do something to try and enhance this absolute craziness of the World Economic Forum, because it helps undermine us. But the idea that they're in league with them, which is what the article that you sent me heavily suggests, I don't see that at all. I really don't.
I didn't see that either. I agree with that, but it did seem that that they were sort of going along the same path, or potentially going along the same path, albeit with a very much more sophisticated system. If it is backed by gold, the crypto idea backed by gold, of course, is arguably the best solution if people can get it right. But what was also, I don't know whether you saw the comments by Macron, who seemed to me to be saying that he's going along with this de-dollarization process, or he feels that would be a good thing. And that's I'm not quite sure where that's going, or indeed how much longer Macron is going to be in charge. Probably not very long, by the way it looked things in France. But that's the first time he's sort of run the de-dollarization thing up the mast, and along with Lagarde talking about the control of the cryptocurrency. It doesn't really matter too much, of course, because they're all broke anyway. So they can call it what they like, and they can control it as much as they like. It doesn't really matter, because nobody will end up actually using it, because they don't have any money. They're all broke. But there seem to me to be one or two flags being run up the mast here. And in the same way, just a little bit off message there, that we're seeing some comments in Washington now about Ukraine, that the Ukrainians army might not win this year. I might not swim the channel this year either, by the way. It's meaningless, but I think there's a bit of arse covering going on here, isn't there? Yes, well, of course, I did say, if you the clip of my speech, everybody seems to be positioning themselves. But what can't be overcome, of course, is the fact that all the central banks are broke, everything's broke, everybody's broke, all the debts can't possibly be repaid. So it really doesn't matter. A lot of this is academic, isn't it? I would still argue that if you've got, and I've got a lot of subscribers, of course, who come, both of us have subscribers who talk to us and want to know about this, you're still better off with a bunch of gold sovereigns in the tea caddy, basically, than you are with anything else, aren't you? And I don't think that's going to change.
I mean, that's escaping basically a corrupt fiat currency system.
Exactly.
You know, and everything that sails with it. I mean, literally, absolutely everything. All financial markets depend on it. But if I can sort of add to your comments a little bit from what you were saying a little bit before your reference to sovereigns. I mean, I think Macron's position has suddenly become a lot more interesting to us. He went to China last week with von der Leyen, sorry, I think I keep on accusing her of being Dutch, but she's actually a thoroughly capable ex-defense minister for Germany, now in charge of the whole caboodle. So no comment is required from you on that one. Quite. Anyway, they obviously sort of thought that since China had managed to somehow broker a peace between Iran and Saudi Arabia, these were the guys to broker a peace between Russia and Ukraine. Now, that's fascinating because I think, you know, I just put myself in the shoes of President Xi. And I tell them quite simply, look, the only way in which that one's going to be resolved is you have got to stop kowtowing to America and get them out of Europe. Then the whole situation becomes resolved like that, and we could all trade with each other. So, you know, that sort of didn't quite go down on deaf ears, but it would have, you know, made the point. And there's no point in discussing it any further as long as the Americans are involved in this. So that's the first thing. The second thing was over Taiwan. You know, I mean, quite clearly, what Macron has done, sort of having talked to Xi, I mean, we can't know quite what was said. We can assume what was said was, you know, butt out of it, as it were. But what's happened is that he's come back, you know, trying to back off from telling everybody that Taiwan is an independent nation. So he's, you know, they're trying to formulate some sort of different policy from the Americans and over Taiwan. And I think that's probably just the start of it. So that's the big politics, which I find a very interesting development. I mean, basically, other than that, they came back with the tail between their legs. Why they went out there, goodness knows, only knows. I mean, what really matters, I think, in the European context is get the Americans out, and us, incidentally, as their poodles. You know, Germany can then get on trading with the rest of Asia, which is actually what she should be doing. I mean, the potential for Germany is being denied her. And that, I think, is desperately important. Anyway, I think that's the point about Macron that I would like to make. I think the thing that's accelerated it is the fragility of the Western banking system. And what is fascinating in this, Godfrey, is that suddenly we find all sorts of countries, even Mexico, for goodness sake, with a border with America, is now saying it's prepared to accept renminbi in payment for its oil. So, you know, I mean, it's not just, it's them, it's Brazil, it's Argentina. I mean, they're all migrating into this big Asian opportunity, because that's what it actually means. And I think that all these countries are dying to get involved, but the problem is so far that every time they sort of think of getting involved, they've been concerned that America is going to clobber them around the ears, you know, either by regime change, which is something that the Americans are very good at bringing about, or alternatively by weaponizing the dollar. But now it's got to the point where they're no longer prepared to sort of share the dollar's risks. Why? Because the banking system is falling over. And I think that is the big, big change that we have seen in recent weeks.
So just one observation, what is a disappointment? One might argue it's a disappointment. I mean, the de-dollarization is going to happen regardless. There's nothing can be done about this.
No.
But there doesn't seem to be any realpolitik on either financial or global situations from the Republican Party, which is the only alternative. It's not just like here. We've got the Muppets in our government who don't understand finance and don't understand money and don't understand anything, or Keir Starmer's lot. I mean, there is no choice. Red or blue, it looks like on election day, but it's all the same. It's all the same. And there doesn't seem to be any, with the exception of one or two, but they are only one or two people who are taking an intellectual, rational approach to government, to global finances or geopolitics. It's, you know, this doesn't seem to be coming together. There seems to be no voices saying, for goodness sake, let's stop. I'm not sure about Jenny. Colonel McGregor thinks there's a big potential kickback in Germany, but I'm not altogether sure. I'm not altogether sure about that. He says, "Oh, we could see the collapse of NATO because it's an anachronism and it's stupid and it's futile." And yes, it is. All of these things, I agree. We're seeing demonstrations on the seat in France, but I don't think there's really that much going on. And when you do get a change like Italy, we thought there'd be a sea change in Italy when they brought in a new regime, and nothing really changed at all. Nothing changed. No. And nothing changed when Trump got in. He'll drain the swamp, he'll do this and do that, but he didn't do any of that. He didn't do any of that. And Sunak, who was a Brexiteer, fake Brexiteer, said we'll roll back and we'll get rid of it. He's not rolled back that. He's still going with all the EU regulations. He was going to do something and he isn't going to do something. Nothing's happening. Nothing at all seems to be happening at all from any dynamics. There's no opposition. There's no Her Majesty's opposition here. There's no opposition in France. France do a good bit of, they burn cars and they rush around. They have punch-ups with the CRS and all the rest of it. But when it comes to election time, they always sort of go for the status quo, it seems to me. Or am I misunderstanding this? And I might say the same about Canada. They had a chance to get rid of Trudeau. And about Holland, I mean, they're all demonstrating it's all wonderful and all the rest of it, but they go on voting for Rutte. They go on putting him back, don't they? And Australia, you get idiots like Dan Andrews in Victoria, put back again. You couldn't think of a more cretinous individual than Dan Andrews, but he's back in there again. How are we going to get out of it?
I think, rather than sort of commenting on individuals, I think the key point really behind what you're saying is that they all are part of the establishment. And the establishment is there. It's a completely autonomous entity, like jelly, which you can't put your finger on really, but it's if you like the mechanism whereby people gain power, they gain influence, they gain that sort of kudos which they probably seek for themselves. But the one thing, the electorate is an inconvenience. But as to Germany, I think Germany is the fascinating thing because they have been under NATO's thumb since NATO was founded, which I think was 1947, 1948. It's like that. And Lord Ismay, who was the first, leader of or boss of NATO, described it well. He said the purpose of NATO is to keep the Russians out, keep us in Europe, and keep the Americans down, or something to that effect. Yes, and it's, the policy has not changed at all. And to my mind, the strategic errors that everybody's making in Europe continue. Why is Finland joining, for example? I can understand Poland's antipathy to the Russians creeping any nearer to them by, let's say, taking over Ukraine or whatever. But, come on, actually the way to to deal with this is for us to just get out of the situation. And I mean, the whole history, apart from Peter the Great, who did want to expand the borders, but it was probably because he wanted to secure his borders, the whole history of Russia has been to defend itself and to ensure that foreign influences don't, take over the country. And that has really been driving them the whole way through. So I just don't see the Russians really wanting to absorb all Ukraine. I mean, I think the answer to that is that if Ukraine came out and said, right, okay, we are prepared to be completely neutral, we will not join NATO, etc., then there would be a basis, I think, for peace talks. But the Americans don't want to get involved because they're doing it from a position of weakness. What was their objective? Their objective basically is to dismember Russia. They were under the false impression that they could actually destabilize Russia by provoking them into a war against Ukraine. And I mean, we've discussed this between you and I before, how the difference between a naval force, which we're familiar with, and a land force, which is basically what Russia is. They can just chuck things at the Ukraine and, until we go home. Really, it really
exactly.
is
we will have to do, and we will have to do.
Eventually,
and why would, I was interested there was no referendum. I mean, Finland's been neutral now for sort of 80 odd years. And very happily so, very prosperously so. Remember why they would join, but they noticed they didn't have a referendum. I'm wondering how keen the Finns are to get rid of their neutrality, and what is the point of an extra 870 odd miles of NATO border, which is indefensible. Nobody. I mean, I think we've got something like 200 people in the Baltic states, or 200 soldiers. I mean, this is ludicrous. This is just the most ridiculous posturing. It's all posturing. I mean, I think the Russians actually laugh. I think they find it all slightly quite amusing, especially with the British Army, which is so tiny now. And of course, as I wrote an article for Going Postal some time ago on the white elephants of all our money going into aircraft carriers, which are a weapon of 1943 in the South Pacific. I mean, we might as well have spent our money on bows and arrows. I mean, we can't deploy them. We can't possibly deploy them. What is the point of all this? And it's so expensive.
Yeah. Well, not only that, Godfrey.
Crazy.
Exactly. But not only that, Godfrey, but I mean, it just seems to me that if you have one of these sort of large platforms like the Queen Elizabeth II or the Prince Charles, whatever, then basically you're just putting a lovely target there to be hit. There's just absolutely, warfare has changed completely. Submarines, I think, are by far the more important form of naval defense, if I can put it that way. But returning to Finland, I suppose that the Finnish government came under enormous pressure from the Americans in particular to join as part of their overall, thrust against Russia. But I mean, it used to be part of Russia, and Finland understands. I mean, well, the Finns actually understand that they've got to coexist with the Russians, and that is why they have been neutral. It just makes so much sense. But, for them to suddenly turn around and say, oh, we've got to join, NATO. I can see also that they might have come under pressure from the Baltic states, who are terrified of Russia taking them over again. I can understand all that, but this is not the way forward. The way forward is to accommodate your neighbor, not try and beat him round the head. We know this in our daily lives. I mean, you fall out with your neighbors, you're just creating a problem for yourself. Don't do it. It's as simple as that.
Do you suppose, we're just winding up on this, Alasdair, and we'll talk again another day. Nobody goes to the barricades with a full tummy. It seems to me that perhaps there might be something happening if Germany, if they're closing factories, their economy starts to falter, and they're a big exporting and manufacturing, and the numbers are looking very, very sick, and that might actually persuade the Germans that they do have a problem. They're going to have to do something about it from a political standpoint, and the best thing they could do is get shot of the Americans, as you so rightly say. And that would make sense, because these protests used to come when we were younger men from the left.
Yeah,
you know, they used to come from the left. The left was very anti-American. The left now seems to be pro-American empire building. They seem to go along with all this, and it's a fascinating dynamic. Where are the students in the 60s? They were banned the bomb and they were all parading. We seem to have a whole non-critical generation in Western Europe, and I would suggest perhaps North America too, of youngsters doing exactly what they're told. You know, this isn't normally the student game, is it? Certainly from the generation we come from.
Well, I think the answer, Godfrey, is that the students are now running the government. So I mean, just look at President Biden. I mean, he's an archetypal, you know, sort of rebellious student from, in terms of his politics anyway, from the 1960s. So I think that's the case. But Germany is central, and I think this is the fascinating point. I think I saw somewhere that Volkswagen have been very keen to retain their interests in Russia. And there is a lot of argument, I think, going on under the surface between American industry and the Mittelstand about denying themselves the opportunities coming from Russia and China. I mean, after all, the Silk Road in the form of a railway goes direct to Dusseldorf. Yeah, you know, so Mercedes cars go to China one way and they're delivered to China before they even come across the channel to us. And white goods start, you know, come the other way. I mean, people like Zanussi, for example, manufacture in China. You know, they just load it up on the train and boom, it's here 7 days later or something. I mean, it will be quicker too. So this idea that Western Europe can divorce itself from what's going on in Asia is complete nonsense. And there will come a point where the NATO relationship breaks down. And to my mind, I think the most important thing that we have seen so far has been the beginning of a banking crisis. Now, this is the beginning, it's not the end. We haven't just sort of, somehow we've dealt with Silicon Valley Bank, we've dealt with Credit Suisse, we have got no more problems. No, the underlying problem is that we've now got contracting credit. And what happens when you get contracting credit? The price of that credit in the form of interest rates start rising because the demand is still there, but the supply drops. So the idea that the central banks actually control interest rates and can sit on them and bring inflation back down to 2% is completely irrelevant. It's actually what's happening in the credit market. There is a shortage of credit, and that shortage is going to get worse for the simple reason that every banker worth his salt knows that he's got to start containing his risks. And he will look at counterparty relationships within the wholesale markets. And he will draw up a blacklist of banks that he will instruct his dealers not to deal with in the interbank market. He will start reducing a lot of the allocations that they are prepared to make to other banks. So you can see the whole system will start imploding on itself. And this is a point which I think so few people understand. The whole thing does depend on cooperation between banks to settle their balances on a day-to-day basis. That is no longer going to happen. We are moving away from that because now there is just too much counterparty risk. And look at the derivative situation. And particularly, this is something that the Bank of International Settlements even came up against. You have something like $80 trillion worth of dollar foreign exchange deals in the system. And the bulk of those are with the American banks. 80 trillion. Now, this is just, I mean, you can't imagine the size of it. That should be on the bank's balance sheets, because when they have an obligation like a derivative, then they actually have an obligation to settle that derivative at a stage in the future. And the derivative is quite simple. It's a forward transaction to buy or sell dollars, say in a month's time or 2 months' time or whatever it might be. that should be on the balance sheets, but it's not. So you can see that the true position in the American banking system is considerably worse than the numbers actually show. And I've actually been sort of fiddling around with the numbers from the Fed, and I have seen, if you look at the balance sheets of the entire commercial banking system, the liquidity in it has deteriorated by roughly 10% since this time last year. So this is going the wrong way as far as the survival of the banking system is concerned. And not only that, but I mentioned all these countries, you know, like from Mexico to wherever, and the whole of the BRICS plus, all these countries who are associated or dealing with China are looking at their exposure to the risks of the fiat currency system. And this is becoming acute. They know, you know, I mean, even Kenya, you know, the president of Kenya was coming out with statements which, you know, they've now agreed with Saudi Arabia that Saudi Arabia will accept Kenyan shillings. Now, I sort of think, yeah, this is crazy, absolutely crazy. But when you sort of say, okay, where's the risk in all this? We know Kenyan shillings are a rubbish currency. I mean, there used to be, when I was a boy in Kenya, it used to be 20 shillings to one UK pound. Now there's something like, I don't know, 50,000 or something. that's, you know, it's been death by 1,000 cuts. But, you know, the Saudis seem to be prepared to accept Kenyan shillings. So you've got to think, well, if they're prepared to accept that sort of risk, that sort of rubbish currency, what are they trying to escape from? Well, the answer is the dollar and euros. They just want to get the hell out of dollars and euros. And we are, Godfrey, we're on the edge of a major collapse. And coming back to the point about CBDCs and all the rest of it, you know, and I know that the planning committees, the software testing, the whole thing will take a good 4, 5, I don't know, 10 years before everybody's satisfied, it's all signed off, and you know, legislation is required from Parliament, or in the United States from Congress, in order to enable the CBDCs. And I can tell you, in America, you just got to think, who bankrolls the politicians? Well, the answer is the commercial banking system. Are they going to tolerate a CBDC which basically removes the relationship between business and the banks from them to become a relationship between business, consumers, direct with the Fed? Are they hellas like? No, they're not going to do that. It's not in their interest. So any politician who's bankrolled by, you know, the JP Morgans and the Citibanks and the Bank of Americas and the Wells Fargos, you know, they're going to find that if they support this, their funding is withdrawn. It's not going to happen, you know. And when you look at what the Bank of England did, I mean, I don't know if you, I would not blame you if you got so bored with the document that you decided not to read it. But I mean, it was a complete watering down of the whole concept, and completely, I mean, it was ridiculous. So that's, I think, where this whole CBDC thing's going. It was a response to things like Bitcoin, basically, and a few control freaks decided to sort of get hold of this and say, well, this will allow us to have greater control over the people. You know, we can monitor what they're doing, we can target this, we can target that, we can stop people we don't want having the currency. Whoopee, this is a jolly good idea. You know, you had all these idiots, if you like, and they are thinking that this was a way forward. It doesn't work. It's not going to work. I mean, I can see the whole thing collapsing on that alone. But before they even introduce it, the whole banking system is going to fall apart anyway. So I'm not worried about CBDCs at all. I mean, you know, it seems to me that's not where we should be looking. We should be looking at trying to protect ourselves from a collapsing financial system. So I return to sovereigns, which you very kindly raised as a subject. So, and that is legal money. This is the whole point. Legal money, get into legal money, get out of credit. I think that, there we are. Anyway.
Excellent. Good note to finish on. As always, Alasdair, lovely to talk to you. Thank you for all that. And for any of my subscribers, a lot of Alasdair's work is on my website. So if you want more detail, please go there, you'll find him. And of course, you can find him direct if you so wish. Anyway, thanks again, Alasdair.
Very much my pleasure, Godfrey.
Okay.
And you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.